So we just flew in today, and I guess fun fact is we didn't know you couldn't call a Uber from the airport, so we're trying to figure out you had to take the bus somewhere. So glad we were able to make it on time. So the topics I want to talk about today from Jenny's team, they mentioned everyone here wants to hear a little bit about recruitment, right? Wants to hear about like job hunting specifically. But I think a lot of those things, especially with like summer coming and a lot of you all graduating, I think it'll be important to mix it in with actual industry topics and industry trends. So we're talking about something more than just, let's say, when you need to apply, what your resume needs to look like. So I want everyone to be able to, like, since we have a smaller group today, I want everyone to be able to like engage as much as possible. So we can make the event a lot more personalized for everyone as well, right? So I want to just ask everyone a little bit about your backgrounds. So who is graduating this summer? Is anyone like graduating soon? Okay, and then sounds like the exec team is graduating soon. For people attending, is everyone a junior right now? Okay, so there's some good time to make progress. Sophomore? Okay, and any freshmen? Okay, so you're in really good place if you're a freshman, if you're already attending events like these. And who here already has like an internship lined up or has some opportunity they're pursuing over the summer? Okay, what was your name? Kareen. Okay, you're very successful as a freshman. Yeah, you have everything figured out already. And what was your name? Young. Okay. Anyone else on this side? Anyone else already have opportunity? We have one. So who here looked for opportunities this summer but didn't find like something they wanted? Or like wasn't just too happy with the outcome? Okay. I want to hear just a little bit from the group. So if there's anyone who wants to share a little bit about maybe how job hunting or recruitment went this summer, do we have any volunteers who want to share?
Also, there's a pride to be fair. May or may not be a blind box.
Yeah, go ahead. What was your name?
My name is
Tiffany, okay.
Yeah, so I just talking about my experiences this summer. I think I tried very hard to search for opportunities and reach out to try to gain more perspective on those positions themselves. But I think ultimately I was kind of like disappointed with my experience just because I think a lot of the positions were small. It was like very competitive. Where like typically like an average of like 200 or something. And I think just from there, it was like very hard to kind of like differentiate myself from others. And then like while I did interview for companies, like it's just like it's kind of hard to kind of get like through that entire interview process. So,
of course.
I think it was challenging, but like yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. I think we have one in the back. Yeah, did you want to share a little bit as well? What was your name? Can you say again? Okay, do you want to share a little bit? Okay. Thank you. Last question I'll ask before we officially start, just to know the crowd a little bit. And like I said, we have a smaller group, so I'll try to engage with everyone throughout, the presentation. And then, of course, there'll be some dedicated QA as well. So who here, just raise your hand if you feel like you're really passionate about design in general or like UX in general, or if you know for a fact like this is the career and industry you want to work in, could you just raise your hands? Okay. So for the folks who didn't raise their hands, does anyone want to share maybe like, is there any other disciplines you're interested in? Is there a reason why you didn't raise your hand? Do you want to maybe share a little? Yeah, go ahead.
It's just that I haven't done a lot of opportunities in UX. So I can't say for sure if that's something you're not.
Okay. And what grade were you? You said sophomore. Okay. Yeah. I think sophomore is still a good time to like figure things out, right? So thank you for sharing. So we'll go into the contents today. And then the first thing I wanted to ask everyone is, like we see a lot of tech news, and from this presentation, a big takeaway I want everyone to have is I think job hunting should be something that feels exciting, right? I know like more or less it feels just stressful, doesn't feel enjoyable at all, right? It feels like something you want to put away and just not think about it. So I'm trying to change everyone's perspective on this a little bit. So two topics usually I find students at different campuses I've lectured at the most interested in is either AR/VR design, right? Or more recently, designs regarding AI. So is anyone here like specifically interested in any one of those topics? Like if anyone feels kind of interested in those? Okay, somewhat. So I saw you raise your hand. Like which topic are you more interested in? Like AI, AR, VR? Both? Okay, very cool. Yeah. So the first thing I want everyone to kind of know about is like passion is very important. So we'll kind of see through this presentation why like being passionate in industry is very important, because a lot of things sort of do shine through on the other side of recruitment, right? So when you're listening to this presentation today, I want everyone to think a little bit about like if today was like an interview, right? And I'm asking you these questions, what would your responses be, right? I think that's a very good mindset to have, right? So I know we have a group, and then there's like a little bit of what we call like bystander bias. You might feel like, okay, someone else will just answer Leon's questions, but really think about like if I call on you, what would your response be? So to go a little bit more into job hunting and industry trends, I want to cover how these industry trends tie into opportunities, and more specifically, how this helps you stand out from other applicants, right? So the first thing, usually why people think about industry trends is important is because they think there will be new opportunities in that area. And that is actually pretty correct, right? So just so you know, a lot of these topics we talk about, you might feel like, okay, are there really these many opportunities about AI or AR/VR design actually, right? When I'm applying to jobs, I'm not seeing them. But you need to know trends are always future facing. So if you're not sort of putting your headspace in this now, in a few years, you'll realize, oh, wow, I wish I was doing this back in school, because now every role is requiring a designer with these skill sets, right? And then eventually we'll transition to that into like, if you want to get hired today, how does that all tie in, right? So I saw a lot of you taking pictures with your phones. I think this is recorded as well, right? Yeah, so there'll be a recording so people can rewatch some of the content. But I do think something that's very important is if you want to take some notes, I will have these key point areas highlighted. So you'll know this is like a good place to take notes. So this first one's just example. This is what a key point is going to look like. So you don't have to take a picture of this. But this is the first key point I want everyone to sort of take away from today's presentation. So if you're new in your career, especially if you're a student, don't try to tell yourself that I want to be a UX designer. Okay, if that is your mindset, recruitment overall will be very challenging, right? So I asked all of you earlier, most of you were either like so-so or you're like, okay, I'm really interested in being a UX designer. So what should I do instead, Leon? This is what I propose, right? Don't say I want to be a UX designer unless you're sitting in a room and you believe I can be the very best designer in that room, okay? I'm gonna go a little bit more into the presentation to explain why this mindset is very important, but just please remember at this moment, if you feel like you want to be a UX designer, a big mindset you need to have is I am aiming to be the very best, right? I'm not just aiming to be a UX designer, I aim to be the very best UX designer, whatever that means to you. And another key point here is, a lot of you might feel like this is kind of controversial, right? You might feel like, well, how can I be the best UX designer, right? So the most important thing from that sentence is, instead of very best, I want you to focus on you believe, right? Because if you're going to recruitment and you don't even believe you're the best UX designer, like some of the folks shared, every position is very competitive, then how are you going to convince other people to hire you? Right? So remember to focus on you believe here. So keep thinking about that as we continue. I'm going to go over some of these slides a little bit quicker, but emerging trends is something very interesting because if you look at technology nowadays, especially in like pop culture or television, most of the technology you see today in the real world is actually documented in almost all fiction, right? So if you think about like AR, VR technology, right? I don't know if has anyone watched this show before. It's a pretty good show. Or if you look at like topics like AI, most of it, has been shown in the world in some form, one way or the other, right? So that makes it kind of interesting. If all of this is sort of already imagined, what is there really left for us to design, right? And what does a designer in this space really look like? So another example I want to present here is like, I made these slides back when I was giving a presentation at UW about Apple Vision Pro. So back when the release first came out, I want everyone to take a look at this. Like, does everyone notice that when people are wearing like these crazy headsets doing like crazy stunts in public, no one really cares, right? Like people are still doing what they're actively doing. So I want people to think about like, why do you feel that way, right? And another trend I wanted to compare is, does anyone know where this video is from? Yeah, go ahead. So when Sora came out, to a lot of people, that was arguably even a bigger deal than having the headsets walking around, right? Because you could generate very realistic videos from just the like a prompt. So the second point I want you to think about is like, as you're going into your career and you see all these new opportunities for design coming up, what kind of technology do you feel like is more important for you to learn when finding a job, right? So on one side, we have new technologies coming out that are like AR, VR. On the other side, we have technologies coming out that are AI driven, right? So when you're looking at this, I want to ask the audience, right? Do people here feel like maybe AI will have a bigger application, spatial design will have a bigger application? How does everyone think? Any volunteers? Go ahead.
AI would not exactly replace the whole creating UX, but rather use it as a tool. Color generation, layout generation, and then used to create the final product.
What does everyone think? More or less the same? Okay, thank you for volunteering. So the key point here I want to mention here is, don't forget about key point one, right? What technology you want to learn to help you find a job better depends on what kind of technology you feel like you can be the very best at, right? So once everyone is in college, I want everyone to remember is you're not like a blank sheet of paper anymore, right? You already have a set of skill sets. So designers come from very diverse backgrounds. When you're looking at applying a job, you need to think about how your existing skill sets tie in with these emerging trends, right? So for example, if you're really passionate about like 3D modeling, right? Or if you're really passionate about like something that leverages game design technology already, then maybe by pursuing or going more in depth in an AR, VR route will just naturally bring you more advantage than saying like, I'm gonna do a complete 180 pivot and then focus all my portfolio projects on AI related designs, right? So hopefully that makes sense to you. So the technology itself, the trends do matter, right? I would argue AI has a bigger application than VR, AR, but that doesn't dictate the direction you go with, right? So same example goes for other industries. If you're very passionate about like finance, banking, fintech is still a very big space, right? You can still choose to focus your craft on that, but you need to know that it has to tie in with your overall skill. So another topic I wanted to talk a little bit more about is how do you get into these emerging trend experiences, right? We talked about like trying to plan and map out, be future facing and thinking about those when you're a student. But how does one actually go from there, right? So in reality, there's only two ways to do it. Number one is it's from projects, Okay, so this can be school projects, this can be side projects, this can be whatever you qualify as a project. Okay, the second kind is from industry, which is arguably more important, but harder to do. Okay, so this is the only way I would argue someone can actually get experience in emerging trends. You cannot just learn this from watching YouTube videos. You cannot just learn this by attending like a lecture or a class. You as a designer have to actually do it. So that is why we want to focus on craft a lot. And one example I was talking with the executive team when we're planning out this event was AI-related talks, right? And not a lot of my coworkers know this, but recently I've started a role at Shopify as a staff designer. And moving away from like a design lead position, a staff designer focuses even more on like individual craft, right? And contribution and making impact. And the role was really exciting to me because this is like a very AI-focused opportunity, right? And I can't talk about everything I'm working on, but there's a lot of cool top secret stuff that comes with it. And a lot of that success where big companies can trust me ties in with my craft and my own abilities, right? So even when I'm doing my own agency work, this is us touring like a campus for Unreal Engine, where one of our clients uses it for doing VR design. You can see that when you transition even from industry to industry or niche to niche, I have a lot of AI experience now, but it needs to start somewhere, right? So before that, one of the experiences I could leverage was my experience with AR, VR design, right? Because it was a cutting edge tool when I was working in it back in 2018, 2019. And now as I'm more interested in AI, I could still leverage that to transition over, right? So we're still supporting clients with like different AR projects, but as I want to branch out to AI, a lot of that comes from like hard work, doing projects, which is very similar to where all of you are in right now, right? If you think about school, it's very project focused, right? So to think more about this whole industry project idea, I know all of you probably think about internship, right? First, you think about that's the only opportunity to get project experience. But a lot of that just naturally has to come from yourself, right? You should be thinking about what are opportunities you can make projects happen, whether that's with a class, right? But maybe after the class, you spend 3 more months to try to make the project come to life, right? Maybe you're taking away something from the project and you're applying it somewhere else. Maybe you're finding new opportunities, such as like after this presentation, or if you meet some of the panelists today, which I'm sure are all very wonderful, if they're working on something you find interesting, you might even connect with them and see like, hey, is there any way I can contribute to this? You could even do cold calling when you're talking on LinkedIn. But you need to understand like industry really starts in school, right? Because this is where you can basically get a free pass to get a lot of project experiences, even when you're still learning. Because after this stage, once you actually move into industry, everyone will be fact checking you, checking your credibility, and just overall evaluate you on a very different level, right? So just remember, when you're a student and you're interviewing for a job, it is very fair for them to ask you what work experience you already have, right? Sometimes you feel like, oh, well, I haven't had any work experience, that's why I'm looking for an internship. That's not really gonna work in this modern day setting, right? So number one thing for you to be successful when looking for that job is think about how you're building work experience already ahead of time outside of that interview. Does this make sense? So far, so good? Okay, everyone's following along? So here's my example, right? Going back to how I'm able to present like Apple Vision Pro stuff to different schools, how I'm able to teach like classes about it, how I'm able to support like high profile clients. A lot of that comes to when I was in school, I worked in a VR indie startup, right? And at this time, this was very challenging because most people didn't want to do it. Right? Like if you think about back in 2018, 2019, that's when Figma just came out, right? So people were thinking like, okay, I mean, if I'm already learning Figma, I'm good. Why would I spend all this extra time to learn Unity that may or may not help me, right? And they might also think like, well, I don't really want to do coding. I don't want to, like, it looks challenging. Figma just looks easy, right? So there's just a lot of natural blockers to that. We'll talk about how to overcome those challenges later through the presentation as well. But for me, at the time, this was long before AI was a thing to the mass public, I felt like this was the most interesting area for a designer to work in. So I told myself, my goal is when I graduate, I want to work at a company like Google or Meta to do AR, VR design, right? So I set that goal and I work backwards. How do I get there, right? I need to show my work experience and my projects, but I'm not going to have that naturally. So I need to go out of my way to do projects, right? So the first thing I would have done in this situation was I did a little 2-week prototype demo of me just messing around in Unity first to see what I can build. I would use this demo basically to meet people who were also very passionate about the VR space to say like, hey, look at what I made, right? And then, they would give me feedback. They said, okay, this is like absolute dog crap, right? Like, that's okay, right? But the conversation still starts. So I'm like, okay, what could I do to make it better? Give me some advice. I showed it to them again. I showed it to other people. And eventually, the space is only so big at the time. People will get to know you, even if you're just a student. And eventually, even if they're not opening a role, it's not too hard for you to sort of find that opportunity, right? So that's the mindset I want everyone to have. It's not really about making money. Eventually, because I stayed with the studio for so long, I started making money, right? And then through this process, I think something that's really cool is at Shopify, we have this saying calling craft is king, right? And what craft really is in design is the ability to make something happen, right? Because when you're a designer joining a team, there will always be these things where it's like, hey, is this my responsibility, right? The more emerging the tech is, like let's say you're working on an AI product right now, you might be confused, like, am I supposed to also do the prompt engineering part, or what am I supposed to do exactly? But that's actually supposed to be what you figure out, right? Because if you can figure that out, you're gonna surprise the people that are gonna interview you for the role, right? You might say like, okay, for other designers, this is how they're thinking about design. All they learn in school is I'm gonna do research, design, iteration, and then maybe testing and the product's done, right? That's so formulaic, everyone already knows that. That does not show your work experience. But as you go through your own craft, you know exactly, okay, to make this happen, all this stuff has to get done. Someone has to do it. If someone on your team knows how to do that, that's great. I can work with them perfectly. But if no one on your team knows how to do it, I kind of know how to do it and I'm willing to figure it out. That's sort of how you show your learning mindset and show your craft, right? So one thing back in the day for VR design was there was so much 3D modeling related stuff. Like honestly, I have no idea. Like even nowadays, I would probably still say I have no idea how to do it. But I worked with the team enough and I learned enough that at the time, somehow I knew how to do it. So it's kind of like studying for a math test. Or like if you ask me how to do it right now to do a demo in Unity, I probably forgot. I probably have to Google as well. But the point is, at the time, somehow I just did it, right? And if you ask me, is that important? It was important for the team, right? Because they felt like you knew what you were talking about. And then once you go into that stage, you build trust and you build bigger ownership, right? So with the startup team, I think that's a really awesome opportunity for everyone to learn and grow because it stayed with the team for so long. We actually were one of the top funded VR titles on Kickstarter all time, right? So I actually made the whole demo, did some like AR blending, and all that stuff later led to putting like UI designs in VR. And once you start going through all that, you realize, okay, those are things that make good stories and convince people to hire you later on, right? Because if you start looking at jobs just on LinkedIn and other places, you'll realize something that I think is hurting a lot of students everywhere is this overemphasis on HCI theory, right? Because that's the part where students, I think someone shared earlier, where you feel like, I don't know how to stand out, right? I feel like I'm very similar to all the applicants, right? So who here is attending like a UX or design related program on campus? Is it pretty competitive to get in, or is it like anyone can join? Okay. So who here is attending like just any sort of HCI class on campus in general? So for the folks who didn't raise their hands, like how are you learning about UX design? Are you learning it through school? What are some ways you're learning about it? Does anyone want to share? Okay. Mm-hmm. And what is your major right now? Okay, cognitive science, I think like Might be similar for all the UC schools. I know for UC Berkeley, UCSD, some other schools, Sabrina and I gave talks to, it's very similar. Like cognitive science is one of the go-to for UX students. And you can do fairly well. Like when I was at Expedia, like for our summer, like we've had interns and new grads from UCSD, right, doing cognitive science. So I think the big thing to just take away here is like, doesn't matter where your theoretical knowledge is coming in, you need to know like that's only one part of the story, right? Because on the job description, it's gonna say, hey, can you do wireframing? Can you do user research? Can you work with PMs? Like almost all job descriptions are gonna say that, right? So you're gonna say like, well, I don't get it. Like I can do this, why am I not getting a job? So you need to kind of read between the lines and understand what are they not saying, right? So a good example I could give here is, let's say you see a job opening, it's a startup, could be a mid-sized company too. There's like 2,000 employees working there. If it's a mid-sized startup, let's say there's 100 people working there. And you see the role, they have the job description. How do you know if you're a good match? Well, you probably think it's a hard question, right? But the first thing you can do is you can actually just research their product, right? So you would actually just put yourself in the shoes of like, if I was a designer there already, what skills should I be using? Once you can start thinking this level, the job description stuff is gonna make sense, right? So the last thing I'll say about craft is like, doesn't matter what niche you're doing, there's always impressive work and there's kind of bleh, like mediocre work, right? And then of course there's like really crappy work, but I assume everyone is like a hard worker if you're attending like an event. So I assume everyone is doing at least mediocre work. Mediocre work happens when you try hard at the start, but eventually maybe your teammates suck, right? It's a good project, you're like, your teammates don't care. You're like, all right, fuck it, like I don't want to deal with it anyways. Or you're just busy with other priorities. That happens sometimes too. Mediocre work, you never want to put on your portfolio or bring to your interview, right? Because guess what the hiring team is thinking? They will always look at your worst project as your presentation. They're not looking at your best work. They're looking most of the time at your worst work. Imagine going to a presentation, the first work you show is like absolute baller, the second work you show is absolute crap, right? They will only remember the ones like, oh my gosh, like this person did this, like how did they do the first project, and like did someone help them on it, right? So whatever topic, whatever project you're working on, let's say in this case it's a VR-driven one. Even nowadays, you know, this was something I worked primarily in school. When I'm talking to clients, when I'm interviewing with companies, when recruiters are looking at my portfolio, a lot of them are still very impressed with this project, right? Whether it's the final output from a visual perspective, whether it's gameplay or whatever we shipped, people are impressed. And a big part of that was, at the time, I cared a lot about my visuals, right? I wanted to make sure it looked good. So naturally, going back to what we said earlier, whatever you need to do, just make it happen, right? In design, it's not just Figma. There's a lot of stuff to learn. Who here has used Unity before? Okay, awesome. That I feel like you raised your hands on all the harder questions, so you must be doing good. But yeah, there's just a lot of random crap that's going on in design if you want to make it happen. Like, can I still do this stuff? I honestly kind of forgot, but I was doing this for a full year, right? Have I used this skill later on in my career? Probably not, okay? Like a lot of the VR design stuff, have I used it again? Like if I be honest, probably not. But those kind of skills get people hired. So one of Sabrina and my really good friends, who is a coworker of ours at UXGo, we've taught a lot of classes together. She got hired at Google from a very small agency because she was a very strong crafter, right? So I was helping her with her interviews back in the day, and she didn't have a big tech resume, right? Like she didn't have like a bunch of like fancy companies like my resume on my background that you could like kind of show off with, but she was a very solid crafter. So I told her at the time, I'm like, if I was an interviewer, I would for sure hire you because you had that Google vibe. And then she was asking me, what is the Google vibe, right? I said, you focus on your craft and the stuff you do, it doesn't look like any other person can just do it. That's who I would hire, right? Because to be honest, like if I bring you onto Google, I want to feel like you are actually a very like special person. I don't want to just hire someone with like some fancy jobs on your resume. So she made some really cool stuff. She's a really good crafter. So that's just a like a quick example I want to mention. So I think by this point, I think everyone should have a better understanding of what craft means to you. But just going back a little bit, if you don't know what it means to you, just think about like, how can I make this happen? Like, can I make it happen? Can I make it look good? If I can, that's good craft. And then I think this other part is like, if you think you can do something that other people can't do, that's also good craft, right? So this point, I want to mention again, so craft does not mean that that is all you are able to do. So I also want to emphasize that. Like, if you have other skill sets like good research, good communication skills, whatever skills you might have, right? That's cool as well, right? But just remember, like in design nowadays, when we say you have good craft, it doesn't mean I'm just looking for a prototyper, right? Sometimes at this point in the presentation, students ask me like, if I just make really good prototypes, is that enough? Unfortunately, no. So you have to know all the other process stuff too. But usually the other process stuff is a bit easier, right? And then the last point I'll add to this section of the presentation is your career will also be a long journey, right? So you'll see when I was giving this presentation for Apple Vision Pro, I was very focused in VR and AR design, right? I've spent so much time with Oculus, Steam VR, and then back in time I had like internship opportunities with Google Daydream. Like the project did get canceled for Google Daydream, but all of this leads up to me in school thinking like, I'm gonna focus my craft on AR VR. I will be that AR VR designer. This is all going great. But eventually, like everyone's career journey will look extremely different. And the whole idea is the craft you develop for a specific skill, even if it's not a direct one-to-one carry, your mindset of being able to overcome those challenges and develop the craft does carry over. So my career ended up being very different from how I imagined. I didn't actually end up working at any of the AR VR companies I thought I would work at, right? For my last internship in the summer, I worked at Amazon, and it was like a very weird internal product, but I really liked the internship and I really loved working at Amazon. I thought I would go back to Amazon. They even gave me a really competitive offer. It's like over like 200 grand right after college, right? It's like twice what they're offering other students, right? They also offer to up-level me. They're doing like all this stuff. So I thought I would go there for sure. And then at the time, I've also had the chance to work at Expedia. I had another great offer at Expedia. So I'm like, it has to be one of these two. And then I didn't end up doing any of those. And I took on another role at GoDaddy, right? So a lot of times like your career does pan out just very different from how you think about it. And then when I was at GoDaddy as a design lead, I had opportunities where like, I thought I would go back to VR design, right? I had like Meta at the time reaching out to me to take on like a design lead role for VR, AR design at Reality Labs. And then I'm like, oh, wow, maybe this is how it all ties together, right? But then eventually going through the interview process, that's not what I ended up doing anyways. And then I started doing full-time entrepreneurship. And then later on, I started getting into the world of AI. And now I'm doing like AI-related stuff at Shopify and continuing entrepreneurship. So a lot of this happens behind the scenes because there's other things going on in your life too, right? So I'm having like, my wife's having a baby soon, right? Sometimes that changes your priorities, right? Back in the day, like where you work also matters, right? Not everything's like fully remote. So not everything's gonna go as planned, but what you'll notice is as you really focus on your craft, even if you're switching industries, like it seems like they're making these jumps, you're like, okay, am I kind of investing my time in the wrong place if I'm doing these massive career jumps? In design, it's very normal, and I think it's one of the most beneficial things, right? Because this is where you really realize, oh, my skill to carry over actually exists. And it does work in mysterious ways because at GoDaddy, you can see one of the projects I work on was like POS and commerce, which does tie into Shopify, but also ties into my past experiences with VR design, right? Because I'm actually working with a physical product, right? So a lot of the 3D modeling stuff I've done, right? A lot of the production stuff I've done, motion design stuff I've done, it ties into that, right? Because when I went to GoDaddy, the first project they asked me to do was a product that needed 3D work, right? And then a bunch of designers apparently tried to do it, but all failed miserably. So when I joined the company, like basically told me I had 1 month to do some very crazy design. And my manager was like, oh my God, like, please don't accept that project. Like, you're gonna get like screwed over. Let's try to find you a different project. And I'm like, it's okay, I'll give it a try. And then I was able to do it. Leadership was all really impressed. right? But all that random skill you have, right? Like they're like, how do you know how to do like a motion design, like product trailer by yourself? Like they're like, don't like 8 people need to come together to do that. I'm like, no, I mean, I did it in like 4 other roles, and then I did that thing in this other role. I did this in this other role, and you can just start doing like these random things, and they carry over role to role. So what does this all mean for you, right? So going back into school, I want everyone to think a little bit more about AI or whatever industry you're passionate in. Let's take an example and just say AI is what you're passionate in. How does that sound with everyone? Sounds good? Okay, so we're gonna use AI as example. We already talked about a lot of examples from AR, VR. So if we use AI as example, and your goal is to become someone who works in AI when you graduate and become like a very successful designer, how does that sound to everyone so far? Sounds like a good goal, assumption. Everyone's happy with that goal? Okay, so let's take a step back. If that's your goal, how can you make that happen? First thing is like we talked about from projects, right? So think about what are opportunities you can do projects. And AI development is actually way easier than AR, VR. Like I'll just put it out there. Like I've done both. Like if you want to do like an AI project yourself, it is way easier, right? Like I could probably, from me, who someone doesn't even code, I could probably do something I want in like a weekend. That's how easy it is. So if you're interested in this, there should be no excuses to say like, hey, I don't know how to do it, or hey, I don't have a team, right? Just try to work it solo, right? So the tools I would recommend here is like OpenAPI, right? The second thing, this is something we've done with like UX Go, with other opportunities, is you can either try to find a class to join, you can find an extracurricular, you can try to reach out to internships. Again, like if you do the internship route, you probably need to establish yourself first, right? Because no one's gonna wanna hire you if you don't really know what you're doing. And then you can find a project that way, but it should be very project-based, right? So this is one of the last clients and also someone we've helped with for UX Go students when we're teaching like one of our advanced classes of building an editor tool, right? So you can kind of see something really cool about this project was we're designing an editor tool for them. So the editor tool is like very similar to Figma, and we're helping them design the editor tool with their editor tool. So you can see on the very far left, that's what their editor tool used to look like. It's pretty bland. It's like meh. On the left side here, this is like what we and the students designed together, right? It's very complex, of course, because it's the editor tool, but it's very much more stronger functions, and it's AI powered. So basically how this tool works is like you can enter a prompt, and then it generates some AI. It generates some UI. The AI, of course, is work in progress. Can you just use it one-to-one? Probably not. But it's better than Figma because the AI also generates the code for it, right? So technically, it bridges the gap. So this is something really cool we worked on. And then going back to, I think, one of the earlier questions over here that you helped answer about like AR, VR versus AI, which has more potential. Even though the tech for AR, VR is way older, and then, like a lot of folks sometimes do say like AR, VR is kind of blocked by hardware, but I want to throw in the argument, it's not really, right? The reason why AR, VR doesn't pick up or doesn't have as much popularity in design to AI is this idea of consuming versus creating, right? So I think on the table on the right here, they mention AI is something that you can use as a tool to create. There is, of course, a big consumption side, like you're consuming AI-generated content all the time. But for VR, AR, it's basically just a tool where you can consume. There are very niche use cases where you can create something AR, VR, but it's not often, right? But for AI, there are so many use cases to creating, and that's why on impact on design, it is so big for us. So that's why I wanted to show this example. Not only are these students designing an AI product, they can use an AI product to help them design a product, right? So this is why I think AI will be everywhere very, very soon. And as a student, this is like your best opportunity to get into it. Yeah, so also agree with what they said. Like AI is not something to be scary, right? It's not going to replace designers. It is probably the best tool for designers to have, right? Because if you suck at coding, this is probably in the next 5 years your opportunity to make stuff without coding, right? I myself suck at coding, so I'm definitely on that same boat with all of you. So the last example I'll give in this here, just to convince everyone, is if you think back to the iPhone, it's one of the most successful products ever launched, right? I use this product as an example a lot when I teach, lecture, or give talks like this. The reason why it is successful is consume versus create. Most people, when they think of an iPhone, they think like this is something I consume, right? I'm browsing TikTok, I'm sending messages, sending messages, you're kind of creating as well. But more or less, you feel like it's a device you're consuming with. But actually, the reason why the iPhone has been so successful is it is a tool that creates as well. Because the iPhone is almost like the first mini computer, right? You can create TikTok videos on your phone, right? You're not creating on your computer, you're creating on your phone. You can create posts, you can create all these things. So that's the mindset I want everyone to always remember. Like as a designer, we're always focusing not just on what our user wants, what they're consuming, but we want to think about how we can create. So that ties back to the craft, right? So iPhone, very successful because it consumes very well, but it creates very well. The only product I see right now in the market that's going to do that is AI, right? It's going to consume very well. People can consume AI content, but they can create very easily. Counter example from this is BlackBerry, right? You can't really create anything from it. You can probably send an email, but that's about it, right? So BlackBerry doesn't work as well because it's very focused on consuming. AR, VR design, same problem. You can make an argument, you can do some creation in it, but it's very hacky. But AI is, so if you want to work on an AI product, very easy for you to start consuming with it. And then going on to this idea of like making stuff yourself, most of your ideas will fail. Okay, so 90% of your ideas will fail. And this is when we're talking about entrepreneurship, startups, like VC funding, people giving you like $1 million just for you to make your idea come to reality. Most of those ideas fail. If you look at Y Combinator, who here has heard of Y Combinator? Okay. If you look at Y Combinator last year, because we work with a lot of clients from there, 90% of their portfolio all backed AI companies, right? The founder for Y Combinator is also the founder for OpenAI, just like establishment there. So 90% of their AI products were AI driven. 90% of them are already gone, right? So that's just how startups are. So as a designer, you should think of yourself very much like a startup, right? You can have all these ideas, have these projects. You try to make every project the best you can and you craft very well. A lot of it might fail, right? But you're failing forward, take it away, and then make another better project that can help you recruit. And then something else I want everyone to think about is like, if you make a product, even if you're doing it by yourself, or if you're doing it with a class, a company, think about like, how can you make your product something people actually want to try, right? That will also help you generate a lot of credibility in your interviews, in your presentation, right? Because to be honest, the gap between a student sitting there in front of you, any of you, versus me, is just I have more experience doing products and projects. It's not really because I'm more smarter, right? It's maybe because I'm like more hardworking, but it's definitely not because I'm smarter than any of you. So if you do a lot of crafting and just a lot of projects, there's really no reason why you can't design as good as I am, right? So this is why, just tying back, I know we're almost at time. We're wrapping up at 12:10, right? Okay, so I have 4 minutes left. Tying back to key point 1, this is why it's so important for you to believe that you can do it, right? And how do you get that confident? How do you get that comfort level of you believe you can do it? It just comes from doing a lot of these projects and products. Once you start to go into that mindset of you believe, and you go into that hiring and you go into recruitment, it will feel so different, right? Because when you're going to that interview, even if you don't know for a fact that you're going to get the job, in that interview, you're going to feel like, I have the option to choose, do I want to work for you, right? Because I feel like I am bringing in more value than my competitors because I'm a crafter and I believe I'm the very best, right? So key point 8, just wrapping up with some of these points. You do have to go from belief to reality. So a lot of you probably after hearing my presentation will be like, okay, I'm really hyped. I feel like I'm going to be the best designer there is. I'm so stoked. I'm going to make a bunch of really cool stuff. And the next day you're like, okay, yeah, like this was harder than I thought, like I actually have to do a little bit of like integration with OpenAI. Like, I don't think Leon knows what he's talking about. And I'm just gonna, like, I'll just do it next year, right? Like that will probably happen to over half of you here. Maybe like 10% of you actually will try to make it from belief to reality. But that essentially is why some people will get the job and some people won't. Right? So some people are trying to go from belief to reality. Number one is you need to understand your goals, you set it, and then you go from belief to reality. So just going back to this is me doing some AR testing with my product, and I'm physically failing here. So mastering something about your craft. As you go from belief to reality, you're gonna run into like, I don't know how to do ABC. Like you're gonna run into more of this than knowing how to do something. So here are some ways to unblock yourself, right? Let's say you're trying to develop something for VR AR, because this is way harder than AI, just for example. The first thing you're gonna run into is like, oh crap, like I actually have to do some coding. And most of the time you're gonna say, like, I have no idea how to do this. Maybe I can find some guy who's a developer. I encourage you to not. I encourage you to actually try to learn it. This is what I did. I sucked at it, but by trying to learn it first, by trying to do a project solo, I realized, oh wow, this is why they think this way, or this is how I can work with them better. So this is one example I'm demoing with, who here has heard of Design Buddies? Okay, so I'm working with their co-founder. We're working on a product together and we're launching it at one of their conferences in a few days. And it's a recruitment tool to help students find a job. So if the tool is successful, probably it will help all of you. And we're trying to build like a calendar app. And then there's just a bunch of stuff I didn't know how to build, right? I know a little bit of front-end development, but I'm trying to integrate AI. I have no idea how to do it. So even for me right now, like a week ago, I am trying to learn, right? I'm hosting these hackathon-style work weeks with my friends. Some of them are very good developers. And I'm just hosting them. I'm asking them stupid questions. I'm like, hey, I'm trying to build this. How do I do it? And then what I realized is even these really good AI developers that are making like $1 million, a year from big tech salary, I show them this thing and they're like, yeah, I have no idea how to do it too, right? Because they're like, I can probably figure it out, but it's gonna take me some time, right? So it's a really interesting thing to figure out. It's like, doesn't matter, it's coding, designing, or whatever you're in. These successful people, they're just very good learners and they're very good at adapting. They're not naturally, it's not because they have an AI job, they can do any AI thing you want them to do, right? So that's why for the last two key points I want to mention, for key point 9, try to become the best first before you join the best, okay? So if you feel like, okay, I'm going through all this, I have a good idea, this is how I can contribute, I have a good idea, these are my weaknesses, but I'm trying my best to overcome them, and you have your work examples to do, even if it's an interview or you're just reaching out to people, people will want you on your team, right? People want you on their team at this point. So key point 10 is, now you have that leverage, always try to learn in a real industry setting. This is how you get that internship. This is how you get that opportunity to put on your resume. So everything we just said before this point, that's the work you're putting in to get the work, right? Yeah, so hopefully that made sense. Here are just some examples. Sometimes students ask like, okay, if I really can't code, how can I do AR, VR design? No one seems to be that interested in AR, VR, so I'll just quickly skim over. Like you can do some spatial sketching and other things. I have some stats here, but I think we're a little bit short on time, so I'll skip past it. And yeah, I'll go to this slide here. So thank you everyone for listening. Do we have time to do like a few quick questions? Okay.
I'm gonna ask a few questions first.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. So thank you everyone.
Thank you so much, Leon, for sharing your insight and presenting to our students. I feel like a lot of times our students are really interested in career development, and sometimes it can get a little daunting and we can get a little lost through finding our own path and like our own careers. So I have a few questions before I open it up to our audience. Have you ever had a time where you question your career or struggle to find projects or businesses? If you did, how did you attack those problems? If you didn't, why do you think that was?
Yeah, that's, sorry, what was your name?
Oh, I'm Lena.
Lena, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lena. Oh, you look very different from like when we met on virtual. That always surprises me. Yeah, I feel like on virtual, it's like, because they're not 3D, it's like, I feel like I met these people and then I'm like, oh, right. So I'm so sorry.
This is coming from like a VR developer.
Yeah, so, okay. I think there has been, and probably more recently than before. I think for me, like, I've always been a pretty hard worker. I've worked like, for the last 5 years, I probably worked like 80-hour weeks every week or like every other week, right? I was talking to Sabrina about this earlier when we were flying, and I'm like, I realized I've never traveled anywhere unless I'm giving a talk there, so it's technically always work. And this is my first time in LA, actually. So, I'm like, that's why I was saying the airport really sucks. Like, I've never seen an airport where you can't call an Uber from the airport. Like, whoever designed that needs to be fired immediately. But yeah, so question my career choices. I think when I was in school, there was a time, and I think the reason was, like, UX design is very challenging. And back in UW, something really messed up they do. I have really good relations with advisors and professors, so this is nothing against them. But what they allow is you have to basically take an exam again to get admitted into the program. So you're admitted to the school, but if you want to join the design program, you have to take another exam. And that was like, at least when I did it, like, it's like out of 400 people, they said there's like one spot. And the reason why it was so challenging for me was I realized I wanted to design when I was like a sophomore, right? And I studied through my college like part-time, so 5 years. So that was a very challenging time because all these odds were stacked against me, right? And I feel like it's very hard for me to be a designer. But I was able to get in because at that time I did realize the moment that clicked with me was even if they rejected me, so I was telling the admission professor, I'm like, I'm actually working as a designer right now to pay for my own tuition. Right? Like, even if you reject me, I'm still gonna try to be a designer. But it's like my career will obviously be probably a lot harder, but I wouldn't try to do something different. And I think that kind of changed their perspective about me as well. So ultimately I was able to get in. And I think in that moment I was very serious, right? So it's like, even if I didn't get a job, even if I didn't get into the program, I would still be a designer. So for everyone here, my advice would be like, if you feel like you're in a position where even if everything is gonna go against you, you don't get that internship you want this summer, you don't reach your goal, whatever you set, and you still wanna be a designer, then I think in the long run, you'll make it for sure. Elon Musk said this quote I really like. It's like, if you fail at something, most likely it's because you haven't tried enough times. But not everyone here has to be a designer. If you're like, okay, I tried, I failed and I hate it, I want to do something else, that's totally cool as well. So that's my advice.
Thank you so much. I feel like that's very applicable to other majors or like other career paths as well. I think it can be really discouraging when you get rejected from something that you've been working so hard with, but just to realize and just to be confident with yourself is so important when it comes to just life in general. I'm going to open it up to our audience right now. Does anyone have any questions that you want, any personal questions for Leon? It can be career related or like anything in his journey. Yes?
So my name is Gail. I'm a senior about to graduate from the linguistics program at UCLA. My question is, so we've talked a lot about AR, VR, like AI, and those types of spaces you can get into in design, and those are all very, glamorous, very high demand skills to have as a designer. And I do not have those skills. I'm a linguistics major. I'm trying to do like UX writing, those types of things, like content creation, basically writing for products. And that's a much less glamorous skill to have. So my question is, how do you advertise yourself and have that like Google vibe about you?
Yeah.
When you don't necessarily have the built-in flashiness of those really high-end skills.
That's a really great question. What was your name again?
Gail, okay.
I know we're a little bit short on time, so I'll try to answer it best I can now, but you can connect with me on LinkedIn after. I'll send you some examples, actually. So you mentioned UX writing specifically, right? I actually think if you can really feel like in the presentation, key point 1, if you remember, like, believe you're the best. If you really can feel like you're the best at UX writing out of 10 UX writers in a room, you're gonna be very successful. You're gonna have that, you can call it Google vibe, whatever vibe you wanna have. So number 1 is, you can pick your niche, but the first step is you need to believe you can be the best at it, and then you try to make it a reality. I work with a lot of UX writers right now too, and I think UX writing is actually strong tie into AI right now, because it's prompt engineering and a lot of things. So if you're curious about like making something glamorous, you absolutely can. I think there's a lot of opportunities you can do that. But if you're just saying like, hey, I got to pay my bills, right? Like I got to do something practical, definitely do that first because you're still going to learn a lot from that, right? Like a lot of reasons why I took on opportunities I did, and not like I actually had some opportunities to continue in the VR AR space, but I intentionally didn't pick it. Was number one because there were some like real life constraints, right? Like I had to stay in a certain city. I had to pick a job that paid more. Like that does happen in reality, but you're still gonna learn a lot, right? But it's just when you're learning or doing whatever you're doing, you need to tell yourself, like, I'm not just trying to be a UX writer to pay my bills. Like, if I'm doing this job, I'm trying to do it, so I'm gonna become like the best UX writer there is, at least like within the company or whatever, right? You don't have to say like, I'm gonna become the best UX writer in the world. So hopefully that makes sense. And then if you wanna see some examples, like you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll see if I can send you some. There's like certain UX writing portfolios. A lot of UX writers also do content design. So depending on how you want to build your portfolio and things like that, like there might be ways where you can showcase something to be craft focused and glamorous, right? It doesn't have to be like it doesn't have to be a big tech project to make it glamorous, right? I included that Google example because like before that, they actually worked in an agency, right? None of their projects were big tech, but because they cared a lot about their craft, they were successful. Yeah, so hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Leon. I think it's so important to stand out with your career path too. Are there any more questions from the audience that you would like to ask? Oh, yes.
So let me ask you, like, what are you interested in right now? Like, just me asking you that question, what was the first thing that came to your mind? What are you interested in? You can say whatever you want. Doesn't have to be practical. Like, what are you interested in? Okay. Is that actually what you're interested in, or do you think that's just what's going to be easier for you to find a job? Okay, that's a good answer. Then, what do you think you're good at? Like, what's the first thing that came to your mind? Okay. Okay. So do you see any connections between the two answers you just gave? Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you two answers. One answer will help you more, but is harder. And the other answer will help you less, but is easier. So which one do you want? Do you want the one that will help you more, but is harder? Or do you want the one that will help you less, but is easier? The help you more one? Okay, you can only pick one because this affects your mindset. So if you pick one, I'm not going to tell you the other one. So which one would you pick? Harder one. Okay. So the harder one, I would probably say something like this. Like, imagine you are actually trying to go into this field, right? Like, you say there are these technical challenges and things like that, but the way you're asking me this question, I can kind of tell it's like you're a little bit scared before you even try to put your foot in the door, right? Because if I know you're actually trying, you might ask me something that's a lot more specific. That's how I'm able to tell. So you might be asking me like, hey, I was actually trying to build this product, right? And I realized I couldn't really do it because I didn't know how to do so-and-so, or so-and-so is hard to do, right? And this doesn't even have to be coding, like it could be whatever, right? So I think you're at a point where you haven't even gotten to that stage yet. So I would definitely recommend to be successful, you can try to get to that stage first, right? Because a lot of the stuff that seems really daunting, you're like, oh my gosh, like I don't think I can do it. A lot of it's because you haven't tried yet, right? So you can even say like, let me try to build a psychology-related product with OpenAI integration, right? Even if you don't know any coding, you use some templates, you watch some videos, you might be able to make like a somewhat working demo in a month, right? And that's like being really, really like slow, right? Because if you manage to make it work, if you watch some of the stuff, right, you can make a pretty easy website, and then the website basically calls on ChatGPT. It helps you answer some questions. Every time I'm saying this is like almost no code. There's a little bit of code, but you have to do some research on how to do it, and that's being a crafter, right? After you do that, like maybe you start thinking about like how can I advertise my product on LinkedIn, right? By just doing that, maybe you meet a bunch of people, right? Or you could just send that demo as a prototype or like as a piece on your portfolio to people you want to connect with, right? You might send it to like companies, you might send it to different people. And a lot of this is like challenging, right? Everything I said is not easy, right? But by going through all this stuff, you might actually realize like, number one, I can do it, or number two, like I realize there's something I just cannot do. So once you realize there's something you just cannot do, I think you're at a better place, right? Because knowing your absolute limitations is important, but I think right now you're still at a place where you're like trying to step in, but you haven't like if you step in and you realize it's like, oh my gosh, it's like this tall, I absolutely cannot. Because right now it's like, you have to like work for it, but you don't really know if it's like this or if it's like that. So let me know if that answer makes sense.
Thank you so much, Leon. Can we give another round of applause to Leon for answering questions and providing our insights? Thank you so much. Right now, we're going to transition onto our Design Decoded challenge. Thank you so much.